Hey soccer fans, Nick back with another episode of the Feed the Fire podcast, where we're talking the Chicago Fire and MLS, Major League Soccer. I want to thank everyone who has gotten this new year off to a great start on the show. Love hearing from Ryan, Donnie, everyone else on social media and by email. And if you want to reach out, get involved, talk to me, maybe suggest some topics that you want to hear about, especially with the preseason coming up and the regular season right around the corner. Please reach out to me on social media at Glasshouse Soccer or via email, glasshousesoccer@gmail.com. So for today's episode, I want to look at some of the new player movement that the Chicago Fire have had. We have heard the news about Kellyn Acosta on the out. We have heard about a new South African winger on the in. We're going to talk about those moves and what that means for the club in this episode. And I want to start off real quick with an article from Matt Doyle to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. Matt Doyle put out an Eastern Conference breakdown of every team's premium roster slot status. And as a reminder, he starts his article off as teams can build a 3DP, 3 U22 roster or a 2DP, 4 U22 plus $2 million extra general allocation money. So the Chicago Fire right now are in the model where their roster has 2 designated players and 4 under 22 initiative players. So they're getting that extra $2 million in general allocation money, or GAM, throughout the course of this season. Now that can change in the summer transfer window. The Fire can shift and remove a U22, add a third DP, and then they will lose $1 million of that additional GAM. It won't be out of pocket. They just won't have the ability to use it for the second half of the season. At least that's how I understand the rules here. And what's interesting to keep in mind is right now you have Leo Barroso, Jay Davila, Bizeli Boazi, and their new signing from South Africa, Puso Dithejane, all as U22 players. So it looks like Victor Radojevic has been moved off of his U22 slot. And in fact, that was the conjunction move as I'm reading Doyle's article here, reviewing the notes on it, that with Dithejane coming in, being a U22 player, Radojevic was moved off of the U22 designation. There are 2 designated players currently, Jonathan Bamba and Hugo Kuipers. So if the Fire want to sign another DP over the summer, Robert Lewandowski, then they will need to move one of those 4 players either off the roster or change their roster designation and make them just a full senior player. What's interesting for the Fire is these 4 U22 players are also all international players. So right now the Chicago Fire have 8 international spots, 8 roster spots saved for international players, and they have to have enough space in the international roster spots in order to move one of these players off. So they would have to acquire another international roster spot, or they would have to have someone obtain a green card or qualify as a domestic player. So the Fire, if they are going to bring in a new DP over the summer, they are going to have to make a lot of different technical changes to their roster. Again, moving one of these U22s to a senior roster spot, or off a U22 designation, and then making sure they get enough international roster spots for all of these players. All right, but now getting to the heart of Doyle's article, here's what he says about the Fire and their DP and U22 spots. Gregg Berhalter got to work early, signing Barroso, Davila, and Radojevic last season, and making Boazi, who he thinks will be a starter, one of the first big signings anybody made in the current transfer window. Then, just this morning, they signed Puso Dithejane and moved Radojevic out of his U22 designation and onto the senior roster. And just so you know, this morning, in Doyle's terms, this article came out on January 13th. So to borrow an explanation from Men in Red 97's Tim Hatza, shout out to Tim, does great work, part of the Chicago Fire press corps over there. Like, he is asking questions, he's covering the team, covering everything. So for the primary source, if you will, for a lot of this info, make sure you go follow Tim Hatza at Men in Red 97. But as Doyle quotes Tim Tim says, Radojevic wasn't a big transfer fee, and he isn't making that much money, so the Fire essentially got a third of his transfer fee paid off with expiring general allocation money they got from going 2-4 GAM last year. 2 DP, 4 under 22, 2 million GAM last year. So Tim called it. They knew the money was available to, not really available, but the fact that Radojevic would have the least amount of cap hit, they moved him off of the U22 spot. So good call there, Tim. Doyle continues, between all of the above, along with some work in MLS free agency, Robin Ludd, and getting Swedish international Anton Saletros in on a TAM deal, targeted allocation money, which means based just purely on their contract, they would probably be a designated player, but you use this targeted allocation money to essentially offset the cap hit and bring them below the designated player line. There isn't really much need to address roster-wide. Obviously, nothing they can use on any premium slots, right? So what comes next, according to Doyle? Player development. Barroso was mostly a backup to veteran Jonathan Dean, and while Davila improved over the course of his half-season at DMed, he's still got a ways to go. Radojevic, meanwhile, has yet to make his debut. If you recall, the Fire signed him, they brought him over, but he was recovering from an injury, didn't play at all last season. And to wrap up his article, Doyle mentions the other thing that might happen. Look, the Robert Lewandowski whispers are not going away, and for that to happen, something needs to happen with Kuipers. So I said when we started this conversation that if they're going to bring in Lewandowski, they're going to have to drop one of these U22 players and go to the 3DP, 3U22 slot model. Or they move Hugo Kuipers, which, given that Lewandowski and Kuipers are very similar in their style of play, at least in my opinion, it would be very difficult to keep them both on the roster and have them both on the field at the same time. So the likelihood, the speculation right now is that the greatest likelihood is that Hugo Kuipers gets a move. Now, is he going to go back overseas and the Fire can make a profit on his time here, or is he going to move around MLS? This is a guy who seems to play very well in MLS, who knows the league now after being here for a couple, 3 seasons, I think. So I think it's just in his second season, just finished up his second season. That's right, because as our friend of the show Ryan put out, he said this is going to be his third year. He's going to excel. He's got a 30-goal season coming up, according to Ryan. So got to keep an eye on that one. So that is going to be some of the interesting roster speculation here. Is what is going to happen if the Lewandowski thing comes to light? What's going to happen with Kuipers? Are there going to be MLS teams who are willing to pay a couple $3 million in cash transfer to get Kuipers? Or are the Fire going to be able to transfer him back overseas potentially for a higher value? It would be great if Kuipers could get some call-ups to the Belgian national team throughout this year, this final year of his contract. Maybe then he gets an extension and a transfer, something to increase his value, though with it being a World Cup year, those international spots or those international starts and call-ups are going to be difficult for someone who's not already in the national team picture. So that is how Doyle kind of sets the scene here for the Fire's offseason. So what did the Fire have to do then, or what have they done over the last week or so to improve their roster or to put themselves in a better place? I am not implying that the departure of Kellyn Acosta is an improvement on the roster, but we have to understand that Acosta did not seem to fit in what Berhalter was building in his most recent season. And so that is the big news. That is what Fire fans have been talking about. Chicago Fire and Kellyn Acosta mutually terminate their contract. That is the big news, especially after he came in with such fanfare, was one of the most sought-after free agents 2 seasons ago, and brings a whole load of experience in MLS at the international level, knew the kind of culture and style that Berhalter wanted to instill in Chicago because of his time with him in the national team. And that's why I think this Acosta signing, not only was it very, very good at the time from a player and a talent and a roster build perspective, but it also was invaluable and probably immeasurable for how Acosta came in and helped set the tone for a new Fire team, a new Fire culture, and then with a club who is refocused on developing and integrating players from the academy, having a guy like Acosta who's done it through the MLS path, who's played at the highest level in American soccer, both club and country, it was a great example and role model for these guys, and a guide and a mentor and all those sorts of things. So what Acosta brought to the Chicago Fire organization can't just be measured with his on-the-field performances. But unfortunately, we're at that point now where that is what we're looking at as Fire fans, as Fire coaches, as a Fire organization. We are looking for what is going to happen on the field. Like Berhalter said at the beginning of last season, the goal is to make the playoffs and have an identity. He's done that. So now the absolute minimum baseline is making the playoffs and continuing to play with a particular style. Now they've got to set higher sights, finishing top 4 in the East, maybe getting to a final, taking home a trophy. They've got Opens Cup, Leagues Cup, and the league. Now, I had a great lunch with our friend of the show here, John Donovan, who I hope is going to do some contributions throughout the season. He said the Fire could be in it for Supporter Shield contention this year. So I don't know if that's ever been a goal of Berhalter throughout his tenure coaching, to ever win the league if he's in MLS versus making a run for MLS Cup or US Open Cup. But we'll see how he plays it. If there's 7-8 games left in the season. I almost said 6-7 games left in the season. I didn't say 6-7. I've been around my kids way too much this week. If there are 7-8 games left in the season, maybe they go for the Supporter Shield if they're close to the top, but we will see. But here's the press release regarding Kellyn Acosta from the Chicago Fire organization. This is as of Wednesday, January 14th. The Chicago Fire and midfielder Kellyn Acosta have mutually terminated his contract, the club announced. The 30-year-old U.S. international spent the last 2 seasons in Chicago, tallying 3 goals and 3 assists in 53 regular season appearances. We thank Kellyn for his contributions to Chicago, both on and off the field, said Director of Football and Head Coach Gregg Berhalter. His leadership and experience helped to guide the Fire into this new era, and this move allows him to continue his career at a high level while pursuing a new challenge. End quote. Acosta has spent his entire career in MLS, beginning as a homegrown with Dallas, before also playing in Colorado and LAFC. He's a 2-time Supporter Shield winner, lifted the 2016 U.S. Open Cup with Dallas, won the 2022 MLS Cup with LAFC as well. All told, Acosta contributed 21 goals and 28 assists in 305 MLS regular season matches. So not an attacking threat, at least the way the numbers bear out, but we do remember his goal against Montreal 2 seasons ago, the Windy City Miracle. And oh my gosh, I have seen so many video clips of that pop up recently in light of his news of his departure. And there are some wild video angles that fans have taken that show just how much that ball moved and twisted and floated in the wind. It was insane. It actually makes me feel kind of bad for the Montreal keeper, but definitely not so bad where I wouldn't trade in the points in the win in that just insanely memorable moment as a Fire fan and for Acosta. Now, internationally, Acosta registered 2 goals and 5 appearances and 5 assists in 58 appearances for the USMNT, featured at the 2022 FIFA World Cup, helped win 3 CONCACAF titles. That is the update on Kellyn Acosta from the club. And looking back at his career in MLS, joined the Dallas organization, as we said, was a homegrown. His first pro season with Dallas was in 2013. He had 11 starts and 13 appearances and continued to increase his time with Dallas. Moved to Colorado midway through the 2018 season, spent 3.5 seasons in Colorado, and then ended up in LAFC for the 22 and 23 seasons before coming to Chicago and helping Berhalter build things anew here. In his MLS regular season career, like we said, 21 goals, 28 assists, and 1 goal in 17 playoff appearances. So it was in the playoffs 3, 6, 8 seasons of his MLS career. Now, where is he going next? I mean, he's not retiring at the age of 30. He's got a lot of soccer left in him. He had a lot of legs in him 2 seasons ago. This season, whether it was either a little nagging injury or just not feeling up to fitness or whatever the case may be, didn't fit the plans in the development for the midfield. Acosta is actually going over to Poland. He will be playing with Pogoń Szczecin. And apologies for my terrible, terrible Polish pronunciation. Despite living around Chicago for my entire life, I haven't picked it up. Anyway, Acosta has finalized his deal to sign with Pogoń Szczecin. They are currently 10th of 18 teams in the Polish top flight, the Ekstraklasa. And I think that standing still holds. I've been taking notes over the last 3-4 days getting ready for this episode, but I think that result still holds. Maybe not if there's a game today, Saturday the 17th. Now, if you look at the table, I think Acosta's, he's going there to help them with their defense. They may be 10th, but if you're looking purely at the table as far as goal differential, as points, as far as how many points between the 10th team and the 6th team, it's pretty tight. So if he can help them tighten up their defense, it's possible that this club ends up within the top 6. They still have half a season to go. So Kellyn can make an immediate impact for them in the Polish league standing. So I think this is it's great for Kellyn that he gets to continue his career. He does get to experience playing overseas in Europe. I don't know if he had aspirations to play in Poland at any point in his life, but this is the opportunity that came to him, and I'm sure he's going to take it and not look back and make the most of it. I also think this is a good move for the club. They do get to move on from a player that maybe isn't in their future plans, and definitely not in their future plans now that the contract buyout has been finalized. But they got everything they needed out of Kellyn. Kellyn got a great contract, a great salary, gets to move on to a club in Poland. And from what I understand, the Chicago Fire actually helped make those connections and helped kind of scout him around or shop him around a little bit. So another reason the Fire are a good organization. They're doing the right thing for their players here as well. The other thing, other than that Montreal goal and just everything Kellyn has meant to this club over the last couple of years, you got to remember the Blurry Acosta. Long live Blurry Acosta. If you guys don't remember it, it was before Kellyn signed with the Chicago Fire. He was one of the most sought-after free agents within MLS, and people were speculating where he would go, what he would do. They were it was possible he was linked to the club, especially with his relationship with Berhalter. Was he going to re-sign with the LAFC? Other clubs were interested. Does he go back home to Dallas? We don't know. Well, then there were pictures from Chicago Fire preseason camp. I think it was out as they were getting ready for the Coachella Valley Invitational out in California, that, hey, there's this dude who kind of looks like Kellyn Acosta sitting in the stands watching the Fire. And if you zoomed in enough, it was still pretty blurry, but it was Kellyn Acosta, and hence the Blurry Acosta image just floating all over Chicago Fire social media and fan media, and then starting to circulate around some of the league-wide social media coverage that was out there. So the Blurry Acosta will, I think, always be part of Chicago Fire lore, this new generation of Chicago Fire lore, and I absolutely love it. I think he was great. So thanks to Kellyn for everything that he contributed. Thanks to the Fire for doing a good thing for him and helping him find his next club. Next piece of news, I wanted to discuss the signing of new winger Puso Dithejane from South Africa. Here is the press release on this new under-22 player that the Fire have brought along. Now, this is as of Tuesday the 13th. Chicago Fire today announced that the club has acquired Puso. I'm trying to do like the phonetic pronunciation here. That's why I paused. Puso Dithejane. Dithejane. Oh, excuse me. I was absolutely mispronouncing it. Puso Dithejane from TS Galaxy FC of South Africa's Betway Premiership. Dithejane will occupy a U22 initiative slot and an international roster position. His contract will run through the 2029-2030 season with a club option for the following season. Per club and MLS policy, terms of the deal were not disclosed. So he gets a pretty good contract here. He gets looks like a 3.5-year contract with an additional year option. So this is one where he's still young. Is he even 21? Yes, he's 21 years old. So even when this contract is up, he'll be 24, maybe 25. And if the Fire like him, they can keep him, sign him to another 3-4 year deal with the potential to move or the potential to make him a featured piece of their squad as he enters their prime. So they're identifying young talent. They're locking them up with good contract terms. Now let's hear from Gregg Berhalter. In welcoming Puso to Chicago, we're adding one of South Africa's best young attacking players on our team. His dynamic energy will add depth to our squad this season while also setting the foundation for him to continue developing and strengthening the team for many seasons to come. End quote. Dithejane, 21, joins the Chicago Fire after spending the past 2 seasons with TS Galaxy, where he scored his first hat trick of the the first hat trick of the 25-26 Premiership in a 4-1 win against Chippa United. He's played in 63 total matches across all comps for TSG, including a personal best 27 matches this past season, 12 starts. So far, Dithejane has started 12 regular season matches in which he has played, registering 4 goals and 4 assists. In addition to the Premiership, he has significant tournament experience in the MTN 8, Carling Knockout, and Nedbank Cup. The exciting young winger began his career at the Transnet School of Excellence, one of South Africa's premier youth development programs, before joining Kaizer Chiefs Academy. Dithejane broke through the professional ranks at Kaizer Chiefs 2 before transferring to TSG in 2023. And then a couple basic stats. He's a winger, 6 foot, 174, born July 24th, 2004 in Christiana, South Africa, and is a South African player. So, Puso Dithejane, the newest winger to join the Chicago Fire. Let's take a look at some of his stats over the course of his time in South Africa, just to kind of give you a little bit of a feel for things there as I scroll down. So just this past season, as we talked about, started all 12 games thus far in the regular season in the South African Premiership, 4 goals, 4 assists. In his pro career, going back to the 2023-24 season, this includes the South African Premier League, the South African Second Division, and all the various tournaments that his clubs have played in. He's had 63 appearances, 7 goals, and 13 assists. So if you want to look at it, he's getting on the score sheet about every third game, but I think this guy has a lot of growth, a lot of development, and a lot of potential as one of these speedy wingers that MLS teams are so looking for to add to their roster. Just as a point of reference, his 4 goals in the South African League thus far have him tied for 6th in the league scoring, albeit with 7 other players. But the league leader in scoring right now has 7 goals, and he is down at 4, adding on 4 assists. And just also for reference, TS Galaxy right now is 8th in the South African table. Let's see, 6 wins out of 14 matches. So 6 wins and 3 draws. Of course, Orlando Pirates at the top of the table, the club where TLB, Bizeli Boaze, it came from here to the Fire. Again, the terms of this deal are not disclosed. However, if you look at the transfer market website, it's an $800,000 value. That's what the player is valued at right now. So the Fire are getting him probably at a really good price. And if they can flip him, transfer him, sell him, or develop him into a centerpiece for the club over the next, I'll say it this time, 6-7 years, then it's definitely a great value. And I think that's what the Fire are really doing well, especially compared to a lot of other MLS teams. They have a great blend of homegrown talent, academy talent, and then scouting these, I guess I'll call them, and I'm not trying to say this as a slight, kind of these third-tier leagues, right? We know what the top-tier leagues are, right? La Liga, Serie A, England's Premier League, the Bundesliga, French's League One. Those are our top tier. Those are the top 5 top 5 leagues in the world. Excuse me. Then we've kind of got like the second tier of MLS, Liga MX, the Belgian League, Portuguese League. Let's throw in, I don't know, maybe Denmark, Brazil, Argentina, kind of like that second tier, right? Maybe a couple of the African leagues, Egypt or Morocco potentially. And then you've got kind of the rest of the world and what I have just made up on the spot now, kind of this third tier of leagues. And what the Fire are doing really well is they're pulling talent from those third tiers. You're seeing the talent come from guys like Boazi, Dithejane, Radojevic, coming from those lesser leagues into MLS, developing further, and then moving either to a better contract or maybe a goal of playing in Europe at one of these second-tier leagues, or getting them into these top-tier leagues, these massive leagues over in Europe, and let's throw in the English Championship there too, because teams that are buying talent there are usually vying for promotion into the Premiership. So this is what the Fire have been doing very, very well over the last handful of seasons. Their roster construction has been absolutely phenomenal. So to attain a player who's currently valued at $800,000 per transfer market, and then in another few years potentially flip that into a $2 to $3 million transfer fee, that's a fantastic piece of business, as well as helping this young player achieve some of his dreams. When I was searching for Dithejane on Google to try and find some more information about him, there was one story that kept coming up about him refusing to be a ball boy, and I'm like, oh, this sounds ridiculous. This sounds like a funny story. Let's take a look into it. Well, it wasn't really that funny, and some people are worried this is going to be a character flaw in the young player, and some people are ignoring it and saying like, he was just a young kid at the time, like, they're going to say stupid things. So the incident that I'm referring to is that there was a series of games hosted, I think, by Johnny Walker, or sponsored by Johnny Walker. They were called the Black Label matches. And in South Africa, the drinking age is 18, as well as the serving age. So you have to be 18 years old to work an event sponsored by and hosted by an alcohol, right? So that was kind of the backdrop here. Again, I'm not versed in South African law, but that's what I've gathered through some of these articles here, some of which I did have to use a quick Google Translate on. So his club, Kaizer Chiefs, was part of this, and because they didn't have enough ball boys over the age of 18, they were asking their second team players to be ball boys, and he refused to do so. Wrote a letter to the owner, to the manager, whoever it was, the GM, which allegedly was a very, very rude letter. And especially as most clubs were using their second team players as ball boys because of this age restriction to be a part of the event. So at that point, it was a huge break between the player and Kaizer Chiefs club. He ended up getting sold from Kaizer Chiefs to Galaxy, then broke through to the first team. Apparently since then, he has apologized or come out and said that he didn't handle it the right way. But again, the question from some Fire fans is this an attitude problem we're going to have to watch? Or maybe he was totally justified in saying, look, I'm trying to be a professional footballer here. I'm not going to be a ball boy in some exhibition tournament or whatever little thing that these Black Label matches are. So, you know what? I really don't feel strongly one way or other. I think there's part of me that, there's the humble kid in me that's like, you know what, if the club asks you to do it, you do it, and you just say thank you for the opportunity. But then there's a little bit of like the cocky athlete. Like, we know guys who are going to be great have that little bit of cockiness in them, have that little bit of edge and attitude to them. And for him to come out and say, dude, I'm not a ball boy. I'm a professional footballer here, and you either value me as that or you don't. I'm torn on how I want to come down on this, but you know what? At the end of the day, it was when he was 18, 19, I think. So I don't believe this is going to affect his career going forward, though. It is kind of an interesting story about his background, and we'll see. Now that he has the opportunity to leave South Africa, it's great that he and Boazi are able to come from South Africa together to the Chicago Fire. Those are guys who are going to be able to help each other out as they get acclimated to the States, as they get acclimated to MLS, and just also training at a higher and professional level. We know Boazi has a few call-ups from the South African national team, so he can share his experiences with Dithejane, who I'm sure has aspirations for himself to one day play for Bafana Bafana. So I think this is a good signing. Anytime you can get younger and faster, especially out on the wings, I think it's a good signing. I think it's a good value. I'm just curious to see how the club views Dithejane in the moment right now. Do they view him as an asset piece who they will want to transfer and make a profit on? Or do they view him as someone who's going to be a regular contributor to this club over the next 3 seasons? Now, I don't expect him to get too many minutes this year as he acclimates to MLS, living abroad, and all the other challenges that come with being a pro international footballer. But what does the club see him in right now, and how is he going to fit in with this current roster? And speaking of this current roster, you've got your wingers in Zinkernagel and Bamba. You got your starters there. You've got Glasgow and Haile Selassie as a couple of your backup wingers, and where is Dithejane going to fit here? There's been some speculation that Glasgow could be on the outs, being shopped around potentially. He did spend some time on loan in USL last season in the US second tier. He's Guyana's, is he their all-time leading scorer at this point, I think? So he's bagged a bunch of international goals playing in CONCACAF throughout the Caribbean region. So he's a very good player, but is he going to be, is his contract status, is his salary cap hit, is his style of play, is all of that going to max out when the Fire are ready to start winning trophies? So his timeline might not sync up with the Fire timeline, his timeline of development and the Fire's timeline of winning trophies. So we may see Omari Glasgow kind of be shopped around, and would not surprise me to see him transferred out at some point during this offseason or this season. And that way it'll give Dithejane the opportunity to come in as a winger and try and compete. I don't think we'll see him taking over Zinker Bamba's starting spot by any means, and I think Dithejane is more of a right winger, an attacking midfielder potentially. So maybe there's even times they'll set him up in the center and have him playing in front of Saletros and Lud, Saletros and Davila, or if they need Lud to drop into a more defensive position, he could be playing ahead of them, kind of becoming the heir to Gutierrez's spot there in the center. But in all likelihood, he will be working out as a winger to begin, and then see what the club wants to do with him. All right, what else do I want to say about Dithejane? Nothing else there. Again, there's always a domino effect when you bring in a new player. You're bringing in Dithejane. How's that going to affect the different wingers on the roster? You're bringing in Boazi. How's that going to affect the different center backs and defenders on the roster? Fortunately, we needed center back help, so that not as much. But again, we've signed Franco to a full-time deal. We bring in Saletros. We bring in Lud. Now Gutierrez has been transferred out. And sidebar on Gutierrez, did get called up to some friendlies for the Mexican national team, so keep an eye on his national team allegiance. And he did get an assist in his first game with Chivas Guadalajara. So off to a good start for him down in Liga MX. But with these new players coming in, how is that going to affect the second half of the roster, the back end of the roster, the depth, those competing to be first off the bench kind of a thing, or those competing to get those spot starts when we need rotated players for those weeknight games, for those tournament games, those cup games, things of that nature. So keep an eye on all of that. I think the Chicago Fire starting lineup is going to be pretty much the way we saw it last year, with the biggest changes coming in the central midfield there, with Gutierrez's departure and Saletros and Lud's arrival. Looking more at the Chicago Fire's roster, they are currently not roster compliant. While they do have the appropriate number of players, for a moment they had extra guys with Ditejane's signing before Acosta had actually departed. So they have the proper number of players on the roster now, but it's still those international roster spots. They have 8 international roster spots currently, and 13 international players. So they are going to be looking to acquire additional international roster spots, either through trade, through purchase from other teams. Again, people are also speculating this is why they're going to want to move Omari Glasgow, because he does occupy an international roster spot. So there's a lot of moving things here, and at this point, to me, unless you're an insider or working directly with the Fire, I mean, it's all speculation as to how they're going to accomplish this. Probably, if they've got to get 5 international spots, I'm assuming it's going to be a combination of every available method. Maybe get a couple guys on a green card, maybe get 1 or 2 roster spots through some trades and transfers, maybe move 1 or 2 of your international players. Not to get into politics here, but a lot of people have wondered how the current presidential administration is going to affect international athletes coming. Apparently, whatever rules they've put out for visas won't apply to international athletes coming to the United States. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a reprieve for some of these MLS clubs, as well as athletes around the world trying to come to the United States to compete. One other thing we want to point out regarding MLS roster compliance and the Chicago Fire's roster construction. The teams, as of last season, have 2 contract buyouts available to them. Prior to last season, they only had 1 contract buyout, and they now have 2. So the Fire can actually buy out 2 players' contracts, and so that would be one way of freeing up a senior roster spot and international roster spot, buying out the contract of someone like an Amari Glasgow. Now, would you want to buy out Glasgow's contract? I doubt it, because it is such a low hit to the cap. You'd want to use that on someone who's making a little bit more money. But as far as international spots on the Fire, I don't think anyone is making so much bank where they have to move that person to clear up the space. However, they had 2. They did have to use 1 on Kellyn Acosta. They had to buy out his contract. Now, even though it is announced as a mutual termination here, this is where the roster rules come into play. And as I understand them, again, I haven't confirmed this with anyone in the league, so to say, but this is how I understand this contract buyout. So a mutual termination does not count as a buyout. However, right, let's do the referee meme there. However, if the club wants to free up the cap space that Acosta's contract takes up, then even if it is a mutual buyout, or a mutual termination, they have to use the buyout. So a mutual termination is not a buyout unless the club wants to get the salary cap space back. Then they have to technically use one of their buyouts. So what's the exception to that? The exception to the exception, so to say? If the player forfeits his salary, then I don't think the club will have to technically use a buyout. So if Acosta were to say, look, I'm just going to walk away from whatever money, I agree that you don't have to pay me whatever I'm owed under my contract or under the salary structure for the season. If the player is willing to just walk away from it, then I don't think you need to use a buyout, because it's not affecting the salary cap in any way, and that way it keeps things fair amongst teams. This is why we have salary cap, just for parity amongst the league, right? I think this is what happened with Xherdan Shaqiri. I think he was able to walk away from whatever was left on his salary, so the club didn't have to use their buyout, because then he just went and signed with Basel anyway. Like, he knew he was probably going to get a better deal with Basel, so why would he still want to say to the Fire, well, you owe me money? And from like a legal contract theory, like if you are owed money under a contract, you refuse to mutually terminate, so to speak, and then you just go sign with Basel anyway, well, you're gonna forfeit that anyway, because you just went and put yourself in a better position anyway. If Shaqiri said, I want that money and I'm just going to sit on my butt, well, then the Fire would have had to use a buyout. But I think because he walked away from his salary and knowing he was going to go sign with Basel right away anyway, probably for as much, if not a bigger contract, then it made no legal sense, and it made no practical sense for him to demand his compensation under the Fire's contract. So that worked out for all parties there. But in the Acosta situation, he's not going to be making as much money with the club in Poland as he was making with the Chicago Fire. At least that's my assumption. And so the Fire bought out his contract, paid him what he was owed, and now they've freed up that cap space, especially since he was a TAM, targeted allocation money player. So with that, we'll wrap up the episode for this weekend. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, listening, whether it's on your favorite podcast channel or on YouTube. I appreciate everyone who sent me messages. I hope everyone's staying warm, having a great January. Looking forward to an excellent preseason with the Chicago Fire. Let's go Fire.